After hearing that the Philistines were fighting against Keilah and stealing food from the people, David prayed for God's guidance about whether he should go into battle against the Philistines. The Lord told David, "Go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men were afraid of the Philistines, so again David asked the Lord what to do. The Lord answered him, "Go down to Keilah, for I am going to give the Philistines into your hand." So David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines and saved the people of Keilah. One of David's men was a priest named Abiathar, who had escaped from Saul, who had tried to kill him. When Abiathar left, he brought with him a special item of clothing priests wore, called an ephod. When Saul heard that David had gone to Keilah, a city surrounded by gates and bars, he thought that he had gained the upper hand. "God has delivered him into my hands," Saul said. Saul called up all his forces to battle David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting against him. He said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod." David prayed for wisdom, asking, "Lord, will Saul come down, as your servant has heard? Will the people of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul?" The Lord told David that Saul was coming, and that the people would surrender them over to Saul. So David and his men, about 600 in number, left Keilah. When Saul was told that David had escaped from the city, he did not go there. Day after day Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Siph, he learned that Saul had come to kill him. Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. "Don't be afraid," he said. "My father will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this." The two of them made a covenant before the Lord before Jonathan returned home, leaving David out in the wilderness with his men. The Ziphites came to Saul and said, "David is hiding in the strongholds at Horesh. Come down whenever it pleases you, and we will give him into your hands." Saul blessed them for their offer and said, "Go and get more information. They tell me David is very crafty. Find out about all the hiding places he uses, and come back to me with definite information. Then I will go with you. If he is in the area, I will track him down among all the clans of Judah." So the Ziphites set out ahead of Saul to gather information on David. Saul and his men then began their search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went into the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, "Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land." Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to fight off the invading Philistines. Once Saul had taken care of the Philistine threat, he was told that David was now in the desert of En-Gedi. Saul called up 3,000 of his best men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the Wild Goats Rocks. Along the way, Saul came to the sheep pens where there was a cave nearby. Saul went into the cave to relieve himself, not knowing that David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, 'I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish.'" Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, feeling guilty for having cut off a corner of Saul's robe, David forbid his men to attack Saul. Saul left the cave and went on his way unharmed. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king!" When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and put his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say, 'David is bent on harming you'? Even though the Lord delivered you to my hands, and some of my men told me to kill you, I spared your life." As proof of his story, David held up the piece of Saul's robe he had cut off and said, "I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life." David explained that he had done nothing to deserve being hunted down. "May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand," David said. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," Saul said. "May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." Saul asked David to swear not to kill off his family when he took the throne, and David agreed.